Every summer, millions of gardeners lose the same battle. They plant carefully, they water faithfully, and then sometime in late June, they walk outside to find their tomato leaves riddled with holes, their brassicas stripped bare, their squash plants collapsing under bugs they cannot seem to get ahead of. So they go to the garden center, they buy a spray, it works for a week, maybe two. Then the pests come back, sometimes worse than before, because the beneficial insects that were keeping things in check got wiped out along with the bad ones. And the cycle repeats itself all season long. What if the problem is not that you are using the wrong spray? What if the problem is that you are thinking about pest control the wrong way entirely? Mennonite farmers have been growing food without that cycle for generations. Not because they have access to better chemicals or more advanced equipment, but because they built their gardens in a way that makes overwhelming pest pressure uncommon in the first place. In this video, we are going to walk through the 6 core principles of how they do it, why each one works, and how you can apply the same thinking to your own garden this season. There are 6 layers to this system, and by the time we reach the last one, the logic of the whole thing will feel almost obvious. The hard part is that none of it can be bought in a bottle. Before we get into the practical steps, it is worth understanding the mindset that shapes everything else, because it is genuinely different from how most modern gardeners approach their plots. Mennonite agricultural tradition is built around the idea of stewardship. The land is not something you own and extract from. It is something you are responsible for, something you manage carefully across seasons and years so that it remains healthy and productive for the people who come after you. That philosophy shapes every decision in the garden, including how pests are handled. The goal is never total elimination. It is balance. A healthy garden supports a whole community of living things, insects, soil organisms, plants, and the role of the gardener is to manage the conditions that keep that community in equilibrium, not to wage war against individual species. That distinction matters more than it might sound. A garden managed for balance looks and works very differently from a garden managed for control. It has more variety, more complexity, more life, and paradoxically, far fewer problems. When you build the right conditions, the garden defends itself. That is the foundation everything else stands on. The first and most important layer of the Mennonite approach to pest management has nothing to do with insects. It has to do with the ground the plants grow in. Mennonite gardeners have long understood something that soil scientists have since confirmed in considerable detail. Plants grown in genuinely healthy, biologically active soil are meaningfully more resistant to pest damage than plants grown in depleted or chemically dependent soil. The connection is not mystical, it is physiological. Plants under nutritional stress, growing in compacted or lifeless soil, produce weaker cell walls, thinner leaf tissue, and lower levels of the natural compounds that make them less appealing to insects. A stressed plant is essentially broadcasting an invitation. A well-nourished plant in living soil is a far less attractive target. The soil practices Mennonite gardeners rely on are not complicated. Composted manure worked into beds each season builds organic matter and feeds the microbial communities that make nutrients available to plant roots. Homemade compost from kitchen and garden waste adds further biological diversity. Cover crops planted in the off-season and turned in before planting break pest cycles, suppress weeds, and return organic matter to the soil without any external cost. Crop rotation, moving plant families to different areas of the garden each year, prevents the buildup of soil-borne pests and diseases that target specific plants. None of these practices is complicated or expensive. Together, they create a soil environment that grows plants strong enough to withstand pest pressure that would devastate a weaker garden. This is where the system starts. Not with what you spray, but with what you build beneath the surface. The second layer is something Mennonite gardens make visually obvious. The moment you walk into one, they do not look like the tidy, separated rows of single crops that most conventional gardening advice recommends. Instead of long monoculture rows of one vegetable after another, Mennonite gardens tend to mix crops together in patterns that are partly traditional and partly practical. Tomatoes grow alongside basil and parsley, brassicas share space with dill and coriander, the borders of the garden are planted with marigolds, calendula, and flowering herbs rather than left bare or lined with mulch alone. This is companion planting, and while the gardening industry has turned it into something almost mystical, the underlying logic is straightforward enough. Many pest insects locate their target plants primarily through scent. A field of identical plants produces a concentrated chemical signal that is easy to follow. A mixed planting produces a complex, overlapping tangle of scents that disrupts those signals and makes it significantly harder for specialist pests to lock onto their preferred host. At the same time, the diversity of flowering plants scattered through and around the garden creates habitat and food sources, nectar and pollen, for a much wider range of insect life than a monoculture ever would. Some of that insect life will be pests, but much of it will be the predators and parasites that keep those pests in check. The specific combinations Mennonite gardeners use vary by region and family tradition, and there is no single formula that works universally. What is consistent is the principle. Diversity in the planting creates complexity in the biology, and biological complexity is the most durable form of pest resistance available to a gardener. The third layer of the system is one that most gardeners either overlook or underestimate, and it might be the most powerful of all, deliberately supporting the insects that do your pest control work for you. Ladybugs, lacewings, hoverflies, and parasitic wasps are among the most effective pest control agents in any garden. A single lacewing larva can consume hundreds of aphids in its brief lifetime. Parasitic wasps lay their eggs inside caterpillars and aphids, killing them from within. Hoverflies look like small bees, but are voracious aphid predators in their larval stage. These insects are free, they work continuously, and they are already present in most garden environments. The question is whether your garden gives them a reason to stay. Mennonite gardeners plant specifically to keep them. Alyssum, dill, fennel, yarrow, and native wildflowers all produce the shallow, open flowers that beneficial insects can access easily. These plants are typically tucked into borders, woven between vegetable rows, and allowed to flower freely rather than being cut back. Some Mennonite farms maintain small hedgerows or unmowed strips along garden edges and patches of clover between growing areas. These are not untidy corners the farmer has not gotten around to managing. They are deliberate insect habitat, functioning as year-round refuges for the predator community that keeps pest populations from exploding. The result, in a garden managed this way for several seasons, is an insect ecosystem that largely regulates itself. Pest populations rise, predators follow, and the balance reasserts without the gardener needing to intervene. It does not mean zero pests. It means pests rarely reach the levels that cause serious damage, and when they do, there is a natural response already in place. The fourth layer is perhaps the simplest to describe and the most consistently underestimated in its impact. It is the habit of daily observation. Mennonite gardeners walk their gardens every single day, not to water, not to harvest, but simply to look. They check the undersides of leaves, they examine new growth. They notice when something has changed since yesterday. And when they find a problem, hornworm eggs clustered on a tomato leaf, a colony of aphids forming on a brassica stem, squash bug eggs laid in neat rows on the underside of a leaf, they remove it by hand immediately before it becomes something larger. This sounds almost too simple to be worth mentioning, but it is genuinely one of the most effective pest management practices available. Pest populations grow exponentially. A single squash bug female can lay 100 eggs. A small aphid colony can double in days under the right conditions. The difference between catching a problem when it is a dozen insects and catching it when it is 10,000 is almost entirely a function of how often you are paying attention. A gardener who walks the garden daily can remove a hornworm before it strips a plant. A gardener who checks once a week finds a plant already defoliated and a population that has moved on to the next one. The daily walk costs nothing and requires no products. It just requires the discipline of showing up, looking closely, and acting on what you see while the window to act easily is still open. The fifth layer involves two tools that Mennonite gardeners use strategically rather than as a first response trap: crops and natural deterrent sprays. A trap crop is a plant you grow specifically to attract pests away from the crops you care about. Nasturtiums draw aphids powerfully, plant them at the edges of the garden, and aphids cluster on them rather than spreading through the bed. Radishes planted near brassicas pull flea beetles away from the plants you actually want to protect. A Hubbard squash planted at the border of a squash bed acts as a sacrificial magnet for squash pests, concentrating the problem in one place where it can be managed or simply accepted as the cost of protecting everything else. Trap crops are not complicated to implement, and they shift the dynamics of pest pressure in ways that reduce the overall burden on the rest of the garden. When pest pressure increases, despite everything else in place, Mennonite gardeners may use simple deterrent sprays made from garlic, hot peppers, onion, and soap. These are not designed to kill insects outright. They make plant surfaces less appealing. The smell and taste discourages feeding and deters insects from settling in the first place. They are a complement to the rest of the system, not a substitute for it. The point is that by the time any spray is needed, the garden already has 5 other layers of defense working in its favor, which means the spray rarely needs to be the main event. The sixth layer focuses specifically on young seedlings, which are the most vulnerable plants in any garden and the ones most commonly lost to soil-level pests before the gardener even knows there is a problem. Cutworms sever plant stems at ground level overnight, and a row of newly transplanted seedlings can be gone by morning. Mennonite gardeners protect against them with simple cardboard collars placed around each stem at transplanting time. A ring of cardboard pressed into the soil around the base of the plant creates a physical barrier the cutworm cannot easily cross. Row covers laid over newly planted beds prevent flying insects from laying eggs on young plants during the most critical early weeks of growth. A layer of mulch around seedlings suppresses the soil conditions that many ground-level pests prefer and regulates moisture in ways that benefit the plant while making life harder for the insects trying to damage it. These protections are temporary. Once plants are established and growing strongly, they are generally far more capable of handling the pest pressure that would have killed them as seedlings. The goal of these early protective measures is simply to get the plant through the most vulnerable window, and once it is past that window, the rest of the system takes over. What makes the Mennonite approach to pest management work is not any single technique. It is the way the techniques stack on top of each other to create something more durable than any one of them could produce alone. Healthy soil grows strong plants that resist pest damage more effectively. Mixed planting disrupts the scent signals pests use to find their targets. Flowering habitat keeps beneficial predator insects present and active through the season. Daily observation means problems are caught and handled before they scale. Trap crops absorb and concentrate pressure away from the main garden, and simple deterrents provide a targeted response when everything else needs support. 6 layers, each one reinforcing the others, building a garden that is genuinely harder to damage than a monoculture bed managed reactively. None of this requires a subscription to a product. None of it needs to be replaced each season. It requires attention, patience, and a willingness to think about your garden as an ecosystem rather than a growing operation. Mennonite farmers have worked that way for generations, not because it is the only way, but because it is the way that asks the least of the gardener over time and gives back the most. The pests will always be there. The question is whether your garden is built to handle them. Build it right, and most of the time, it will. If this gave you a clearer picture of how to build a garden that defends itself, share it with someone still fighting the spray and repeat cycle. And if you want more practical, no-nonsense guides to growing food the way it was grown before everything came in a bottle, subscribe.